Let me tell you about the year my Uncle Amos salted a whole smokehouse by guess, and turned a winter's worth of good pork sour before the snow ever melted. Before we get into it, subscribe to the Root Cellar for the next forgotten story from the old days of curing, smoking, and keeping food through winter. It was late November when it started, the way it always did. The ground had gone hard as iron, frost on every fence rail, breath steaming in the hog yard, and the hogs finally cold enough to work. That one kill was everything. A big barrow, cured right, could carry a family clear to spring, meat on the table through the whole white stretch of winter. But only if the salt was honest. That was the one rule that sat under all the others. Now Amos, he'd cured meat for 30 years, and that, right there, was the trouble. A man does a thing that long, he stops measuring, he stops weighing, he goes by the hand, by the feel, by that little voice that says, close enough. Amos had stopped weighing his salt. The old rule was plain as a fence post. Every ham got its full measure, near 1.5 ounces of salt for every pound of meat, packed tight, worked into every fold, no bare spots, no mercy. You didn't guess, and you didn't skimp. You gave that meat every grain it asked for. But salt cost money. It came in by the barrel, hauled a long way over bad road, and every scoop you used was a scoop you had to buy again. So Amos figured he'd stretch it. A little less on each piece, just a handful kept back per ham. Nobody would know the difference. That handful, that's the whole story right there. Here's what the old-timers knew in their bones, even if they couldn't name the science. Salt pulls the water out of the meat, and without water, nothing can rot. Cut the salt, and you leave just enough moisture down deep, close by the bone, for the spoilage to take hold, right where your eye can't see it. The outside looks fine. The trouble's already inside. If you've ever wondered why the old folks weighed their salt like gold, this is the story that tells you. The margin was thin as a knife's edge, cured on one side of it, sour on the other, and Amos had just leaned his whole barrel toward the wrong side. So he rubbed his hams light, packed them down in the barrel, and let the brine draw. Done. The die was cast, and he didn't feel a thing. The first warning came quiet. The pork wouldn't firm up right. A properly salted ham goes hard, and it goes dark. You can feel the cure in it, solid under your thumb. His stayed soft, pale and giving, like it hadn't taken. He told himself it was only the cold. Watch that soft ham close, because right there is where the whole winter quietly went wrong. So he had soft hams he couldn't explain. And instead of admitting the salt had failed him, Amos hung them up in the smokehouse and reached for the one thing he was dead sure would save them. Days of slow hickory smoke. Now here's the thing about smoke that Amos never let himself think about. It works from the outside in. That blue hickory haze drifts up around a hanging ham, and slow, over days, it dries the surface and darkens it and builds that hard rind everybody knows, the mark of good smokehouse meat. But it stops. It stops well short of the bone. The fire can season a crust 1 inch deep and never once touch the meat down at the joint where it matters most. And that's exactly what fooled him. Day by day, those hams looked better. The rind went dark and handsome, the color a man waits all fall to see. So Amos stood in that smokehouse, breathing the sweet hickory, and told himself the fire was fixing the fault. The outside was lying to him. Every hour the crust looked more like good pork, and every hour the sour crept a little further out from the bone, down where his eye could never reach. If you've ever trusted a good-looking crust over what's underneath, You already know how this ends. Here's the second hard lesson, and I'll give it to you flat. No amount of smoke saves meat the salt already failed. None. The margin was lost back in the barrel, weeks before he ever lit the fire. Smoke is the finish, not the cure. You can feed that fire clear through Christmas, and it will not put right a single grain of salt Amos kept for himself. Now the careful curers, the ones who ate fat every winter, they knew this in their bones. They measured salt like gold dust, weighed against the meat, never by the fistful, never by feel. And they packed it. Into every fold, around every bone, no bare spots, no mercy. Where Amos rubbed light and moved on, they worked that salt into the meat like they were owed something. And they gave it time. This is the part folks forget. Weeks in the cure before the smoke, not days. Weeks. They let the salt draw slow and deep, all the way to the center, before the fire ever got its turn. The brine did the saving. The smoke just signed the work when it was already done. That was the whole discipline of it. They trusted the method over the gut, because the gut lies and the brine doesn't. A man feels a ham, thinks it's fine, thinks he'll stretch the barrel a little, and the meat pays for that feeling. The brine has no opinion. It draws the water out or it doesn't, and there's a thin margin, thin as a knife's edge, between the ham that carries you to spring and the one that turns on you. Remember this one. Measured like gold, packed to the bone. Weeks, not days. That's the whole difference between eating and going hungry. Amos did none of it. Not the weight, not the weeks, not the packing. And the fire finished anyway, the way fire always does. So the hams hung there dark and handsome all through the deep cold, looking for all the world like good meat. Until come February, they took the first one down for a Sunday dinner and set a knife to it by the bone. And the smell told the whole story before the blade was halfway through. That greenish, sweetish rot down at the joint, rising up out of the meat like something had died twice. The rind was dark and perfect. The outside looked like the finest ham you ever saw hang from a rafter. But down deep by the bone, where no eye ever looks until the knife is already in, the pork had gone sour weeks ago, and the smoke had never known a thing about it. That was the whole cruel trick of it. The fire seasons the skin. It cannot reach the joint. All that slow hickory, all those days of tending the coals, and it never touched the one place that mattered. The salt had failed there first, quiet and unseen, and no amount of smoke was ever going to walk in after it and set things right. If your stomach just turned at that, good. That's the exact lesson every old curer carried to their grave, and it wasn't just the one ham. Amos cut into the next, and the smell was the same every time. Same greenish sweet rot, same soft give at the bone, same barrel. He pulled them down one after another and laid them out, a whole row of handsome ruined meat, and understood what he'd done. The shortcut hadn't spoiled a piece. It had doomed the barrel. When the salt goes light on all of them, the whole barrel is suspect, and there's no telling the good from the gone until you're standing over it with a knife and a rising stink. So picture that Sunday table. Deep winter still outside, snow up past the low windows, months yet before the thaw. A family that butchered a fat barrow in November and should have eaten rich clear through spring, sitting down to thin plates and hard rationing instead. Watching every scrap now, and all of it, every hungry night of it, traced back to a handful of salt one man decided to keep in the barrel to save $1. That's the moral. and it's the plainest one the old ways ever taught. Salt was the one place you never cut corners. Not the smoke, not the time, not the care. The salt. If you'd have your pork carry you through winter, you give it every grain it asks for, and you don't argue with it. Because the careful ones knew that. They measured their salt like gold dust, weighed against the meat, never by the fistful. They packed every fold and worked it hard around every bone. They gave it weeks in the cure before they ever lit the smoke, and they trusted the method over the feeling in their gut. The gut lies, you see. The brine doesn't. That thin margin between cured and sour, thin as a knife's edge, was the whole game, and the ones who respected it ate well while Amos scraped. So tell me by the fire, would you have weighed it? Or would you have trusted your gut like Amos did? Now this is a tale from the old days, and I'll say it plain. Modern curing follows tested recipes and safe salt ratios for good reason. Don't go guessing your own by a story. Weigh it, pack it to the bone. Give it time. That's the whole of it. Sit tight by the fire a while. There's another forgotten story coming, from the old days of keeping food through a long winter, and I'll bring it to you next.